Hey, mythology fans, how are you? It's Joey Rags here again, the myth guy. Thanks for joining me for another video on stories from world mythology. Usually, these last few videos I've done had to do with monsters like witches, werewolves, and usually, witches are always pictured as being servants of the devil. But years ago, I came across this remarkable book called The Night Battles, and I believe it's originally a work in Italian. The writer is the researcher is Carlo Ginzburg, and it's been translated into English. I read it years ago. It's a different take on old beliefs that existed a long time ago, like hundreds of years ago, and it also casts witches in a different light. For example, witches. In other words, what this book is about is basically not all witches are evil. There's actually, in a place called Friuli, which is in an area of Italy. This researcher, Carlo Ginzburg, found undug evidence of trials against certain people who claimed to be good witches. I'm not talking about cunning folk, the people, townspeople, the villagers that went to these people if they felt they were bewitched or they wanted to find something that they lost. No, I'm not talking about those people. I'm talking about people who claim to be witches, just like any other witch. They can fly through the air, but they fought against evil witches. What happens is that these people claim that if you're born with a call, you're called to be part of the army of these good witches. These good witches have a name they're called Benedatti, which in Italian means good walker. And a call, if you're born with a call, that's in case you don't know, that's the dried up placenta that sometimes sticks to the baby's head when they're born. And so if you're born with that, it's believed to be a sign you're going to be a Benedatti. And what happens is that these men were rounded up by the Italian Inquisition. And the Inquisition, everybody thinks, when they think of the Inquisition, Monty Python, nobody expects the Inquisition, but everybody thinks that there are always Spanish Inquisition. But the Inquisition actually was in Italy too, the Italian Inquisition. And the Inquisitors brought to trial these various people who were so-called Benedatti. And it's a very interesting story. What these people claimed was in certain nights, especially on Thursdays, about 4 times a year, they were called to come to a meeting place, and they were called in spirit. They would be sleeping, and instead of their bodies, they would be awakened by a person that was calling them to gather. And it was their job to get out of bed, but they wouldn't physically get out of bed. They would rise in spirit, and they would ride spirit animals like cats and owls and all kinds of creatures to this gathering place. And in this gathering place, they would meet with other witches that were the followers of the devil, that were trying to destroy humankind by destroying the crops and the vineyards and the livestock. And what happens is that they would fight with, the Benedatti would fight with, I believe, fennel stalks. And the evil witches would fight with sorghum stalks. I don't really know much about fennel and sorghum, but they were different types of stalks they would fight with. And if the Benedatti win, that means the following spring, the fall would be a good harvest. There wouldn't be loss of, the crops would grow, they wouldn't be spoiled. The cattle and livestock would survive. And what I find interesting about this is that it's a totally different take on the story of the witch. And what this writer says is that it's believed to be a very old belief. There's a lot of talk in various books on the history of witchcraft. Some are totally outrageous, like Margaret Murray, who was trained as an Egyptologist, came up with this whole notion that the witches were really just pagans that were misunderstood by the Catholic Church, and they were, that they were followers of the devil, when really they were just pagans, and that there were very few people that were really Christian in the Middle Ages, and this in the 15 and 1600s. That's never really been proven. But here's this actual cult that is believed to have survived. I mean, I don't know much about. I never took an anthropology class, unfortunately, but it's a subject I'm interested in. I don't know if you find evidence going back. I don't know when this evidence was, how old this evidence is of these trials, if it's 1600s. I don't know what parameters you have to meet to say it's actually very old. But apparently the writer thinks it is very old, and that not all witches were servants of the devil. There was some witches that were defenders of God, and they thought they were working on the side of Christianity by fighting against these evil witches that wanted to destroy crops and livestock and vineyards, and cause famine and disease and people to die. And I'm trying to think of any other details. And there's also a section here that talks about another trial that took place in Livonia around the same time, of a man that was brought to trial because he claimed to be a werewolf. And he insisted on saying that he's a good werewolf. Werewolves of his type are dogs of God. What they do is that they hate the devil and they hate witches. And what they do is that he was a fighter against witches that steal the seeds and the grain and buds and animals that people live on. And he would, these evil witches would also, they would take them to hell. And these werewolves would, including this guy that was on trial, would go after them and fight with them. And but of course the Inquisition, they didn't want to hear it. They were like, no, you're a werewolf. Werewolves are servants of the devil, the same as witches. And the same thing with these Benedatti in Italy. The Inquisition refused to listen to them. They said, you may think you're doing a service by fighting bad witches, but a witch is a witch, and you're doing the devil's work in the end, So they had to confess that they were going to stop doing that. And I think they got off fairly easy. It's not like that they were, I don't know if they were tortured or burned at the stake or hanged or whatever, But the guy who claimed to be a good werewolf, he wound up getting lashings, unfortunately. I'm not saying I believe his story, but I believe that you can't just you can't overgeneralize, If a person thinks he's doing good, he's doing, why would you say, oh no, you're evil, and supposedly this defendant got very angry and would argue with these clerics and say, I'm so sick of you people telling me I'm evil when I'm telling you I'm doing good, so anyway, one person wrote to me, one subscriber wrote to me, saying very nice things about my channel, and they wanted me to maybe talk about bears, because, this video is talking about, witches fighting other witches, werewolves fighting witches. What about bear? Well, I don't know about the interaction of bears and witches and werewolves, but I know that the little I know about what I've read about in world myth and legend and folklore about bears is that supposedly the term berserk comes from bear shirt, because it was believed that if you put on the pelt of a bear, and I think I spoke about this in other videos, if you put on the clothing of a wolf, you could turn into a werewolf. If you put on the fur of a bear, you have the strength of a bear and could become, like a bear and even transform into a bear. Hence the berserks from Viking storytelling. But not just turning into bears. There's this great epic called the Saga of one area of old myths and legends, which is a fascinating resource, is and it's not talked about enough, is Icelandic sagas. And these are stories, and they come in different types. Some are family sagas about the early settlers in Iceland and what they went through, and rivalries between families, and the deaths that occurred, and blood revenge. But there's other types that have to do more with adventures. For example, this book here that I bought years ago, World's Classics, called Eric the Red and Other Icelandic Sagas, is a great example of Icelandic sagas. This particular one is translated by Gwyn Jones. I'm going to have it, don't worry, I'm going to have it in the description below. And what happens is that in this book, he talks mainly about different sagas of early Icelanders. I don't know how this is classed as literature. I mean, it's great literature, but in terms of fiction or, real life stories, I think they might be regarded as based on some truth, but woven into a rich literature with probably a lot of embellishment to make it a good story. And what happens is that the very last story is a story called the Saga of Rolf Kraki. And what happens is that there's various interesting elements to that saga. Some sagas are short; they're not very long at all. Some are longer. Some of them are purely mythological, like the saga of Sigurd the Dragon Slayer and the Volsungs. That's a mythological saga, and it's an epic essentially, but in Iceland, they're called sagas for some reason. But in the saga of, there's an interesting bear story in the saga of Rolf Kraki. His greatest warrior was a guy by the name of Bolvar Bjarki, which means something like little bear warrior. And what happens is that he was in the service. Rolf Kraki was a king that had these knights around him. Some of them were berserkers, and he had these great warriors, and he was a warrior king. So he had a lot of battles, and his greatest warrior was this Bolvar Bjarki. And what happens is that one of his big battles, Bolvar wasn't on the battlefield. He was in a trance in the hall, in one of the buildings, and one of the kingdom's buildings. And one of the other warriors came in to see him and said, "What the hell are you doing sitting here sleeping? And you're not helping us out in the battlefield." And Bolvar said to him, "You shouldn't have woke me up." Because what happens is that while he was in this trance, there was, he wasn't on the battlefield, but he was. But in the form of a bear that was killing the enemies left and right. So what happens is that in this trance, he was able to send out his spirit in the form of a powerful bear. And it turns out he had this trait probably because his father had a spell on him. His father was a bear by day and a human by night, and he had various children, one of them being Bolvar Bjarki. And he was able to send out his soul or his spirit as a ferocious bear that could do more damage in battle than he can do. And sure enough, when he awoke from this trance, where he was interrupted by this other warrior, the bear was gone, unfortunately. And Bolvar fought himself then, because I guess he couldn't go back and get back into the trance. I don't know how that works. I guess once the trance is broken, you can't just go back into it. So anyway, I thought that was a great story. He was able to fight, but his fighting wasn't as effective as the bears, unfortunately. So anyway, so a little bit about Witch on Witches. These two books are absolutely amazing. Carlo Ginzburg, The Night Battles, and Witchcraft and Agrarian Cults in the 16th and 17th centuries. So yeah, this stuff, these trials of this guy who thought he was a werewolf and this guy who thought he was a good witch, they were from the 16th and 17th centuries. So he thinks that this may have been a further widespread cult. And there may have even been, he doesn't believe it's a coincidence that there was a werewolf trial and a witch trial around the same time. He felt that there could have been a larger intermingling and in a wider territory in Europe of these beliefs of good witches and good werewolves, rather than just werewolves that go around and eat people, and witches that just go around eating babies and destroying crops. So anyway, with that, I'll let you go. But for those of my subscribers who've been with me for a while, I'll give you a little update on the cancer I've been battling. Back in, if you recall, in 2021, I needed surgery to remove a malignant tumor from my head, from my brain. And what happens is that I had to go through radiation and chemotherapy. And unfortunately, a few months ago, I had this is more scientific, so I hope this is not too boring, but it's interesting. I had another MRI. I've been having an MRI after the chemotherapy, having an MRI every 3 months to see that there's nothing suspicious coming back. Because even with treatment, you could have a few survivors and the tumor cells start growing again. The oncologist saw something that he didn't like. So I had what's called the PET scan. Now, what a PET scan does is that they actually tag a radioactive isotope to glucose molecules, and they inject that into you. Now, glucose is taken up by brain cells for energy, especially if these cells want to divide. So what happens is that I had to have a PET scan, and the PET scan, these areas that my oncologist didn't like glowed white in the PET scan, which shows that they're eagerly taking up a lot of glucose molecules, which means that it's some sort of evidence that they perhaps are dividing cells, and if they're cells that want to divide, they're most likely tumor cells. But it's not 100% sure. But I had to get something called Gamma Knife. Gamma Knife is this treatment that uses gamma rays. I'm like, if this doesn't kill the cancer cells, I'll probably turn it to the Incredible Hulk or get fried. Hopefully, sometimes these treatments, they're kind of tough on your body, Luckily, I've had no side effects from the gamma ray knife. It's called Gamma Knife, the hospital I went to. And sometimes, so I'm going to see the results of this Gamma Knife treatment in early December. So I'll get back to you to find out the results. Now, hopefully what he'll see is if the spots are still there, at least they won't be bigger, which means that the Gamma Knife did its job. It killed the cells so that they're not growing anymore. Or better yet, they may have shrunk even. So I'll learn that more in December, so that I'll definitely get back to you. My sister got me this shirt. It says I'm fried with a fried egg on it, because sometimes, because I've had radiation, I've had gamma radiation, I've had chemo, and they'll probably put me on chemo again just to be careful. I don't want to go on it again, but just to make sure that these cells stay dead. So I'll get back to you when I get better news. Okay, well, thanks for listening. Happy reading.